Welcome to the Lessons from Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Brian Beckcom. How would you try a lawsuit during stay-at-home orders in the middle of a pandemic? Well, my next guest did exactly that. John Scott Black. John is one of the founders of the law firm Daly Black. John went to the University of Texas School of Law and also the University of Texas undergrad, where he was a student body president. After graduating from law school, John was a legal intern to Justice James A. Baker of the Texas Supreme Court. John then worked at Gibbs & Bruns, one of the most well-respected commercial litigation firms in the country. John is fluent in English and Spanish, with much of his family still living in Mexico. John, in my opinion, is one of the leading trial lawyers of his generation. And if I had a case involving first-party insurance or commercial litigation, he would be one of the first, if not the first person I would call. John's also the father of two beautiful daughters and has run multiple Ironman triathlons. In fact, over the years, through the sport of triathlon, he has helped raise over $100,000 for various causes. In the podcast, John and I talk about how it was that he was able to try a case entirely by Zoom during the pandemic, the positive experiences of that and some of the negative experiences of that, some of the things that he would change, and some suggestions he has for going forward during these very difficult times. This is a real treat because John is truly one of the leading lawyers of our generation and is one of the leaders, as you can see, having tried the first lawsuit, as far as I can tell, in the entire country during the pandemic. And now I give you John Black. So I had Brian Beckcom here, VB Attorneys, and I've got my good friend, John Black. I've known John since, probably at least the mid-90s. John's a lawyer here in Houston, and he's really in demand for a lot of different reasons, one of which is John, as far as I can tell, is the first lawyer in the country to actually go to trial during the pandemic. And so he's going to talk about that a little bit today on the podcast. But before we get into that, John, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I'm cooped up like most folks and trying to not go crazy and make the best of the situation.
So most people, I think, your firm is Daly Black, and I think most lawyers in Houston, and frankly, not just in Houston, but in most parts of the country, are familiar with you and your work. But for the people that aren't, tell us a little bit about where you come from, where you grew up, your education, how you became a lawyer, and kind of what you and your partner do to help people.
Yeah, so I'm a native Houstonian, grew up here in Houston and then spent a little bit of time in Mexico. My mom's from Mexico City. Went to law school and undergraduate at University of Texas. And, for the longest time knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I'm not sure if it was because I argued with my parents a lot or if I enjoyed debate or maybe both. But loved law school. And when I graduated, worked at a firm called Gibbs & Bruns, which was still is a really exceptional commercial litigation firm. But I found that I wasn't getting into court as much as I'd like. And my passion really was to be on the plaintiff side and represent people and businesses and Lord, just not keep track of my time anymore. So, I started doing that in, I guess it was 2000 and, oh boy, with Rick, it was 2013, I think, that we joined up. And really the idea was, let's be primarily a boutique that handles policyholder cases. We represent policyholders, folks that have disputes with their insurance company. And it could be anything, right? It could be, medical related, property related. A lot of what we do is catastrophe related events, giant events like hurricanes or earthquakes, hailstorms, fires where large numbers of people are affected. And even today with the COVID pandemic, we're looking at and reviewing a lot of these business interruption claims. So, we're really a first party litigation boutique, but a plaintiff's practice generally as well. And we just like helping people and businesses that need a good trial lawyer. And we love to try cases. I mean, I think that's something that every trial lawyer says, but I'm not sure every trial lawyer means. And we actually really genuinely like it.
And you've always been really good at it too. I mean, I remember we've known each other since law school, which was for both of us in the mid '90s, and you were a successful advocate even in law school. Even before you became a lawyer, you were kind of on that path. You were also the student body president at the University of Texas, and had a lot of experience as a speaker and a persuader. So basically, your firm is about helping people that have insurance policies that might have disputes with their insurance company. That's kind of your specialty.
Yeah.
And I think most people probably consider your firm to be, if not the top firm in that area, certainly one of the top firms. So I have a question for you before we get into your trial during the pandemic. Tell the listeners a little bit about, as somebody who sees these insurance disputes on a daily basis, what kind of problems with insurance policies, what kind of insurance company disputes are you seeing now? And do you predict that we will all see over the next few months as a result of the pandemic? Like what should people be looking at and being careful about right now?
Well, these are, the pandemic related cases are business interruption claims. These are, businesses that have been forced to shut down or, negatively affected because of stay-at-home orders or other kind of disruptive events. And a lot of these insurance policies provide coverage for that business interruption coverage. It just says, look, if there's some form of interruption in your business, we'll cover you for X period of time. And it wasn't until about 2006 with the SARS outbreak that insurers decided to start really excluding those types of events. So there are a lot of policies out there that have virus exclusions, and then there's some that don't. These are terribly important claims for businesses because we've never seen a level of shutdown in this country like we are now. And these are companies, businesses large and small, that are facing bankruptcy, going out of business permanently. So incredibly important cases that are going to turn on some legal issues. I think that for the most part, courts have not had to deal with before, although they're analogous situations. This is pretty unique, and so there's just going to be a wave of this litigation and people, filing these cases, and courts and even lawmakers are going to have to figure it out. And it'll take years for it to get sorted out. And it will likely require some form of legislative backstop or action if the insurers are held to be partially or even fully responsible.
Yeah, so we actually, my law firm just got a denial letter for our business interruption policy yesterday. So you may have another client to add to the stable pretty soon. But I read something the other day, John, and I don't know if you saw this or whether you can confirm it or not, but I think I remember reading that the insurance company's national lobbying group has already weeks ago started lobbying Congress to pass special legislation to essentially say you don't have to pay any of these policies that you wrote. Have you read that, or do you have any knowledge of that?
I have. I've heard that that's happening, and that Senator McConnell's got a piece of legislation that he's looking at to broaden immunities, and I would imagine that would include for insurance companies as well. And on the flip side, of course, I've heard there's states like New York that are trying to pass legislation at the state level to require insurance companies to pay on these claims. And the reality is, is a litigator, I mean, my job is to look at the policy and to figure out what the law is at the time. And the reality, from my perspective, is making these laws retroactive, I don't think is very fair, and then eliminating their liability makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Yeah.
If you bought and paid for coverage that covers this type of loss and it's not specifically excluded, then it should be covered.
Yeah.
And so, but of course the insurance companies are terrified of that because it really could be just a catastrophic liability for them.
Well, and, unlike many businesses, my view of this is the insurance companies have an army of people that evaluate exactly these kinds of massive risk. And if you decided to write an insurance policy for somebody and took their premiums, and then the risk happens, you should pay for it. I mean, this is the entire business of the insurance industry is predicting risk and collecting premiums to cover people that experience unlikely events. And so
that's exactly right. I mean, if the insurance company can predict the risk of nuclear war or terrorism and write exclusions about it, it seems odd to me that they can't also do the same with viruses. And in many cases, they didn't. Now, some they did, but I mean, you've got movies, right? Contagion, Outbreak, dating back years, where these events were predicted. So the idea that an insurance company whose job it is to, like you say, sit around and assess and predict risk, didn't think that this was a possibility is just false, right? And so what they really want to do is avoid paying, which is also improper. And, really the biggest argument you hear coming from them is, well, if we have to pay, it's going to bankrupt us. But if they don't pay, right, there are a lot of businesses that are going to be bankrupt. If they bought the coverage, they should be entitled to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's actually an author named Nicholas Nassim Taleb who wrote a famous book called Black Swan, which was about totally unforeseen, unpredictable events. And he's come out because people are like, oh, this pandemic this is a black swan. And he's like, that's crazy. We've known about these problems for years. This is not a black swan. This is something people have been talking about for a long time. We knew it was inevitable. And the insurance companies ought to honor their promises. Well, we could talk about that a lot, John, but I think one of the things that people are going to be really interested in hearing about is you and your partner actually did a real, complete, full trial during the pandemic by Zoom. And we were talking right before the podcast. I'm a little jealous because I have a case that's set for trial in May, and I was really hoping that we could go try that case and be the first ones to try it. But you beat me to it, like you beat me to a lot of things over the course of our careers. But anyway, I'm jealous and I'm real proud of you, and I'm real excited to hear about this. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the case, about the judge, and about being the first law firm, as far as I know, in the entire country to try a case during the pandemic by Zoom.
Yeah, so we were really fortunate to have Judge Bo Miller in the 190th, who was open to the idea and suggested it. The parties both thought it was a good idea because it was a bench trial, and he's a very, very good judge. We were trying a pretty discrete issue. This was a case like so many of ours. It's a property damage first party claims. Basically, our client had property damage to their home from a hailstorm in 2015. They made a claim. The claim was essentially denied and underpaid. And he sent the case to an appraisal process, which is like a quasi-arbitration type process to try and resolve the matter. That didn't fully resolve the case. There were still issues related to interest and attorney's fees that are owed. So those discrete issues, the interest and fees, were before the court and don't require a jury. So we were able to try that to the court in about 6 hours. The parties had told the court that it would take 2 hours. So a little bit longer than expected. And I think not because it was done by Zoom, but because lawyers love to hear themselves talk. But it was surprisingly efficient and effective. And, I've got some strong feelings about whether I like Zoom as an alternative, but in this environment, it was just a great way to get our client his day in court, and we're just really grateful to have a court that was open to it.
So how tell us, like, logistically and kind of practically how it worked, whether there were things that you thought went really well, maybe things that didn't go quite as well? Like, what advice would you have for other people, lawyers, judges that are interested in doing remote trials? Like, what would you tell our listeners about that?
So the way this worked was we provided the court all the exhibits electronically as PDFs, and so the court had all of those. And the court provided a Zoom link for everybody to log into at a designated time, and then there was a separate link for people to watch the proceedings. Court's proceedings are obviously intended to be open, and so the court was mindful.
Really interesting. Yeah,
So
nice.
I am told that as many as 2,200 people watched some or all of the trial.
Nice.
And, you know, you could see, I never paid attention, but you can see how many folks are logged in at any point. And, you know, the court basically went through, allowed the parties to make pretrial arguments, which we did. And, you know, that was all done by presenting documents through Zoom, sharing your screen. It was, I would recommend people figure out how to do that. Some of the lawyers, including myself, were not as adept at sharing the screen and sharing exhibits.
I was having a problem with that yesterday, John.
Yeah, so that was a little wonky. You might want to practice that before you start a trial.
Yeah.
But we would share the exhibits as we went throughout the trial, and during the examinations. You have the option of throwing the document up on the screen, and showing it to the witness. So you are kind of your own choreographer as a trial lawyer, which I kind of like. I can go to the document whenever I want, and kind of direct the audience very easily. I would tell people, turn off your alerts. I have various gadgets around me, and I'm an Apple user, so my texts are pinging through my laptop. Turn that off. I was annoying everybody, I think, throughout the proceedings until I figured out how to turn that off. It turned out it was just a very animated family group chat that I couldn't shut up. So one of the difficulties is examining witnesses and getting everything on the record cleanly. The court reporter several times stopped parties, more so than when you're in actual trial, because it's hard to know when someone is about to talk, because you're all remote. And so people frequently would talk over one another, not intending to, but so that is challenging. You really need to wait for full stops, which makes examinations very difficult, particularly cross-examinations. My direct examination of Daly was fine because we've done it so many times, and I know what's going to come out of his mouth after 25 years of being his friend. But cross-examinations are really much tougher remotely. And I would tell people that you really need to keep it punchier and maybe a little cleaner and more organized. Otherwise, it can get really
get out of hand.
It can get out of hand.
Yeah. John, you mentioned something about there being a link for the public, and that to me that's really, really interesting, really fascinating. So for the non-lawyers, non-judges on the podcast that are listening, generally speaking, courthouses are supposed to be open to the public. Anybody can come in and watch a trial, but unless it's a really big trial or something that's been in the news, you normally don't see anybody watching trials. That people have other things to do. But now that we've got the Zoom capability, potentially thousands of people can watch run-of-the-mill cases, and to me that seems like a good thing on balance.
I think so too. I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I know Texas Constitution has open courts provision, and so obviously it's intended to be an open process. And so, our judge was very mindful of that. I do like the idea of people being able to watch remotely and see their judicial system, work, live. And I'm told, I had a discussion this morning with a news reporter from Bloomberg that more and more courts are warming to the idea of Zoom trials. Apparently in Virginia federal court, there is a $500 million patent case going to trial. It's a bench trial, and it's going to be done via Zoom as well. And so, in times like these where you don't have the option of going to court and being there in person, which I much prefer, this is just a great alternative, and it's great that judges are becoming more and more open to it.
Yeah, and you when we were talking before we got on the podcast here, you mentioned that there had been some media reaching out to you about being the first firm to actually do a Zoom trial. So tell us, like, who's reached out to you? What is the media like? What kind of questions they have? What are they interested to hear as it relates to trying lawsuits via video conference?
So I know NBC Nightly News was watching the Zoom trial. As I mentioned, I talked to Bloomberg this morning. Texas Lawyer did a piece on it. So did Law 360. And, the angle seems to be, what went right, what went wrong. Right?
Yeah.
That is, kind of some of the things we're talking about. What things can you expect if you do this? The other is, did you like it? Did you think Zoom was a good way to try a case?
Tell us about that.
I will tell you that it is a good alternative to being, let me rephrase that. I think it's a fine alternative to trying a case in person. As someone like you, Brian, that enjoys being in the courtroom and likes to think of himself as being good at it, and there's a lot to the art of putting on a case in front of a jury and presenting in front of a live audience and or a judge. And examinations and advocacy in person require, a lot of skill, on your feet skill and thinking. Some degree of that is taken away, right? When you're doing it remotely. I mean, it rewards lawyers that are not as skilled, right? You can have your script in front of you. You can, you can really prepare things and it come across very nicely. But a tremendous courtroom presence. Pick your legendary trial lawyer, is not going to be as exciting or dynamic or interesting by Zoom, right? Which I like less. I mean, I really think that's part of our trade, our craft. And that gets diminished some, right?
You talking about this brings to mind, and I know you've had this. I've had this multiple times where you're either examining a witness or you're making an argument or something, and you can kind of tell that the jurors are with you, or a couple jurors are reacting a certain way to a certain witness, or they mouth something, or you can just there's a feel to it, a judgment to it, which I mean. I don't know what your experience with Judge Miller being the fact finder, but even in a bench trial, when you're arguing to the judges, you want to know how they're reacting. You want to have a feel for the reaction, and I don't see how that can possibly be replaced by video trials. So
it can't. I mean, I always call it the energy in the room, right? A really good trial lawyer can gauge the energy, both of the jury and the judge and everyone, right? And that can take so many different forms. They're irritated, they're hungry, they're whatever, right? That element is really removed almost entirely. I mean, you still gauge facial reactions of some, but and so I don't like that. Right? I mean, I really think part of our skill is knowing, right? Because if you are there in person and you can gauge the reactions and the energy in a room, when to push a little more, when you might get that extra additional answer, or you might know when to back off. And it's hard to make that determination when you're on a Zoom call.
The other thing is, and I don't know what you think about this, John, but like I can see, so being in person and being able to think quickly on your feet, or being able to ask the right question at the right time, or a witness gives an answer and really listening to his answer and then going in a different direction based on the answer. Those are the skills of a good trial lawyer, but I think they're also maybe the most effective way of getting at the truth, because if you can script everything out, everything's real clean and antiseptic and it's all pre-planned and there's no surprises, then you're not really doing everything you can to get to the truth. Where when things happen quickly, before you have time to think too much, or a witness says something that's not in a script, oftentimes I would argue you're getting to the truth much more effectively. And I do worry a little bit about the trials being far too scripted. Let me ask you this question, because I know there's probably plenty of people that are thinking about this. It has to do with the jury system. So I had a podcast with Judge Ravi Sandel last week, and we talked a little bit about the logistical issues we have calling juries in Houston right now. And it's not just Houston, it's everywhere that's been affected by this. And, I was telling Judge Sandel, I had jury duty in Houston roughly 6 months ago, and you got to go to the tunnels, and there's thousands of people all packed in together. And then
Good for you for going.
Yeah, and then you gotta get in the elevators, and right now there can only be 2 people in the elevators and things of that nature. So I was asking, obviously there's a lot of issues right now with getting juries together, and I don't see us being able to do that anytime in the near future. What would you think about a trial by jury via video conferencing or Zoom? Like what would upsides, downsides, potential pitfalls, potential good parts of that? What would your thoughts be on jury trials by video conference?
One concern would be the jurors not really paying attention. I mean, it's hard enough to get them interested in a trial when they're there in person. I think it may be tougher to do it via Zoom. Jury selection would be a real challenge, right? Just the logistical issue of having that many people on a screen. I mean, I guess it's possible to do it that way. But once they're in the box, they're the fact finder, no different than Judge Miller was, and it's not like they get a chance to ask questions. The things I'd worry about are, like you said, not being able to necessarily gauge their reactions as well as you might, and maybe the risk of losing them some if they're remote. I mean, there's something to them being captive and having to be there in person to listen.
Yeah.
Although I don't know. I mean, when you're on a Zoom call, I had one with my staff not long ago, and they made the crack that it's hard for you to hide on a Zoom call, that everybody sees your face, and you got your own little box. So I don't know, it might work okay.
Maybe we get some technology where if a juror falls asleep, it his Zoom box starts flashing in bed or something like that.
But it's interesting you mentioned your conversation with Judge Sandel, because I got a call from the American College of Trial Lawyers, and they're doing a study, and I'm not sure exactly what the issue is, but I think it has to do with the possibility of doing remote trials or Zoom trials, and the interplay with kind of our our jury system. And I would just say, again, I mean, my preference and belief is that being in court and being in front of the jury is the best way to try a case. But I mean, I'm sure that's what people used to say about candlelights and abacus. It may be that, but I certainly do think that going forward, judges across the country, maybe starting with some of the federal courts, are going to see this as a viable alternative to having hearings. I mean, the idea of getting on a plane and flying to Virginia for a status conference, to me, being in Texas, doesn't make a lot of sense anymore. I mean, maybe the judges are going to be more open to that, and that would be a great thing, especially for smaller firms like mine. But
agree 100%.
But this is coming. I mean, this technology is here. It's coming. It's going to change the way we do a lot of things. I hope it doesn't ultimately replace the way we try the case to a jury, but I would never swear that it won't.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more about that. And I can actually see it being easier in federal court to do remote trials, jury trials, because, federal courts, first of all, they only have 6 jurors,
Right.
generally speaking, plus voir dire is very, very limited. So you kind of don't have that problem quite as much. But, this is an important issue. People, I think, even as lawyers, take for granted our right to a trial by jury. And
Right.
that is that is, if not one of the most fundamental rights that the founding fathers wrote in the Constitution. I mean, clearly one of the most important, written in the Seventh Amendment.
Right.
And it's in jeopardy right now. I mean, it truly is in jeopardy.
It is, and I think it has been for a long time. I think
Yeah.
Seventh Amendment rights to a jury trial have been, under siege for years, whether it's, arbitration clauses or, ADR provisions, appraisal provisions in my business. I mean,
Yeah.
you're exactly right. The founding fathers had very much in mind a process of resolving civil disputes that involved our peers. And, I very much caution against anything that strips that away.
Yeah, and I think we nowadays, with the pandemic, on top of all the efforts that we had in the past to weaken the jury system, we got to be really cautious as lawyers and judges about. We got to fight back against any attempts to weaken the jury system during the pandemic. And there are certainly interest groups, and we won't name who they are, but there are interest groups who absolutely will take advantage of this opportunity to try to weaken the jury system even further. So,
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, you see the political maneuvering already, certainly at the federal level, where tort reform agendas are being pushed because now is a good time to say, hey, we got to really immunize this industry or that industry, and we can't allow our heroes or our drug makers or that can't allow anybody to ever sue them, and we got to be very careful about giving away our rights in a moment of crisis. I mean, I was told long ago by a lawyer that I really like and admire and trust a lot. He said, I never make important decisions when I'm angry or when there's a crisis going on at the firm.
Yeah.
Or if there's some, so I always wait until it passes.
Yeah.
We're clearly in crisis right now. We're clearly in react mode, and this is not the time to eliminate constitutional rights.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to talk about a complete and total overreaction. I mean, that's but there are legitimately groups that will do exactly that. They'll try to use this crisis as an opportunity to advance their own personal interest. And so we just got to be real cognizant of that. So John, let me ask you, so you're a small business owner, and what steps have you taken? Like, what are you telling your people? Kind of tell us, how you've shifted to more of a work from home type of model. Like, what are you as a small business owner doing to make sure you keep the wheels of your business going during these times?
So we shut our firm down about a week or two before everybody else did. We kind of saw it coming, and by saw it coming, I mean just reading the news and seeing what other places were doing. And we had folks within our firm that were concerned and had small children, so we wanted to be cognizant of that. So we very quickly went to weekly Zoom meetings with the staff, and then weekly Zoom meetings with our intake folks, and then periodic calls and touching base with lawyers. And it has worked surprisingly well. I mean, I think the one thing that I try to emphasize to our firm, and I'm lucky to have a really great group of people working with me, but was that, this will only work if everyone works.
Yeah.
If everybody sees it as vacation, it will not work, and our small firm will not do well.
Yeah.
And so everybody really saw it as a blessing to be able to work from home, and pushed hard and would touch base periodically in these weekly calls. But it has worked very, very well. And what I've come to learn, like I'm sure a lot of businesses are learning, especially service businesses like ours, that so much of what we can do can be done remotely.
Yeah.
and now apparently trials and hearings. So, as long as you have good people and remind them that they need to be pulling their weight, and if they don't, it'll be obvious quickly.
Yeah.
That can be done from home, and so our plan, at least now, is to remain, shut down at least through the middle of May, and then we'll just reassess where things are then. I don't think we're going to open things back up on Monday.
Yeah, we just had an office management meeting today, right before I got on the call with you, and we were talking about that very topic. And I was asking, are we going to order everybody back to the office on May 1st? And I think the clear answer is no. It's a little too early for us. Now, there are other businesses, there are other types of work that I think you can do in hopefully a safer way, but we're essentially conducting a real-time experiment right now is what we're doing. And
that's right.
Hopefully the experiment will succeed, but we'll see. So, and John, and one of the things I think it's real important for people to know is like a business like yours that helps people with insurance issues is going to be indispensable over the next 4, 6, 12, 18 months, because without businesses like your business, I mean, these insurance companies would just absolutely run roughshod over everybody. So I'm personally really glad to hear that you guys are still open, still doing well. We're kind of, we had a fire in our building 10 years ago. We had Hurricane Harvey, and now we've had this, and we haven't shut down for one day for any of that stuff. And
that's great.
So it's good to hear that you guys are doing well. John, I think it's fair to say that you're kind of, a lot of people consider you to be kind of a thought leader in our profession, and you have a lot of interesting ideas. So tell us a little bit about, and obviously none of us can predict the future. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but what is your sense of what is going to happen in the next 6, 12, 18 months as it relates to the legal system and the pandemic? Do you have any predictions or any feels for what the future holds?
Well, I mean, I think you're going to see a lot of firms suffer, and you'll see more consolidation, I think, within our industry. I mean, there's going to be, consolidation stemming from not just the pandemic, but the downturn in the oil,
big deal.
Industry. And so, you're already starting to see that. And so you're going to see a lot of lawyers that are out of work, that are, a lot of firms reducing pay, having to readjust or change the way they practice. And, I think that, you will see changes to the way firms allow people to work. I mean, I do think this has opened our eyes to a different way of working and being. And I think that's a good thing, right?
For sure.
Law firms are going to, recognize that certain functions can be done remotely. Their lawyers don't need to come in and wear a suit, and their clients may not even expect it, right? For years, you heard clients, we dress up or we have really nice office space for our clients, not for us. And maybe some of that will start to fall away, but it really, this will shift our consciousness, certainly.
I think that is an absolutely phenomenal way of putting it. This is one of those events that literally shifts the entire globe's consciousness almost instantaneously. The last thing I can remember like this was 9/11, where literally everybody looked at the world differently almost immediately. I'll give you a good example, John. I have a person that works at our firm that lives in Tomball, which is about an hour away. And so she has a 2-hour drive there and back every day. And she can literally do 100% of her job from home. And so I'm not sure she'll ever need to come back in the office, other than, one of the things that I've been struggling with a little bit is you got to have some human connection, right? So 100% remote work, at least in the legal profession, I just don't know if that is feasible. But certainly I think what you said about this really opening our eyes about some of the ways we've been doing things and maybe changing those things. I think that's a really, really important point. Like I said, I still am struggling a little bit with the balance between remote work and then also having the human interaction that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and some people crave it more than others. I mean, I think right now everybody on the planet to some degree or another is hurting for human connection, and they find themselves talking to strangers in the park they might not otherwise, just to get a nod or my oldest daughter turned 16 during all of this, and we had my ex-wife and I planned a little drive-by parade just so that she had a moment where she felt some connection. And so it really is a shift in consciousness where for the first time really in my lifetime, we can all, whether we're in Houston or in Stockholm, Sweden, we can all point to one thing and say, well, how is the coronavirus there where you are? I mean, it's like we're all under the same moon.
It's unbelievable. Yeah, no, it's unbelievable. My wife and my family and I were in Turks and Caicos for spring break. And everybody there is talking about it. Like literally everybody on the entire planet is talking about one thing. It is truly remarkable. Well, John, I'm very cognizant of your time. I know your time is valuable, very valuable. And so I don't want to keep you that much longer, but I do have a couple kind of wrap-up questions for you, if you don't mind. So tell us, I asked this question because I'm personally curious. I like to ask successful people this question.
Yeah.
What person or people had the most influence on you and what you become as a man and what you do?
Wow, that's a really good question. I would say there are a handful. My dad was a huge influence in me early on, teaching me to work hard, even when he had money and I didn't feel like I needed to. When I got to college and became student body president, I really was surrounded by people I had no business being around that were incredibly influential. But there was a man, Bobby Ray Inman, a retired admiral, that really taught me the skills of leadership and just being around him and seeing the way he conducted himself was really influential in my career. And he told me once at lunch, he said, because I asked him, I said, what the hell are you doing spending so much time with me? Because he really kind of took me under his wing for a while.
Yeah.
And he said, young man, he said, years ago, someone told me that they were going to open the door for me and give me opportunities I had no business getting. And that the only thing I had to do in return was open the doors of opportunity for others. Nice. And so he really, he's an incredible man. I'd say those two folks that are living have had the greatest impact on me. I'd throw one last one in there if I had.
Yeah, sure.
And I'd say my grandfather, my mother's father, who was a Mexican citizen, and he managed to run an incredible business and also be an incredible family man and father, and the value of his family was so important. And I, unfortunately, as you know, am divorced from my ex-wife. We're very close.
Yeah. But
I think we've still been able to maintain a really tight family group, and that's very, very important to me.
Nice.
So,
nice. Well, that's really cool. Well, John, again, I'm jealous, but I'm also proud of the fact that my friend of 25 plus years his firm was the first firm to try a case during the pandemic. By the way, I didn't ask you this. I probably should ask you at the beginning. I think I know the answer, but did you win the trial?
Well, we don't know yet. I don't.
Oh, you don't know yet? Okay. All right. Knock on wood. Knock on wood.
I don't think we're going to know until the end of May. The court asked for some briefing on a couple of legal issues. So,
okay. Well, if you win, you got to promise to come back on and tell us how.
I promise I'll come back on and tell you about it.
All right, John. So before I let you go, we've talked about what you and Daly do. Where can people find you if they want to find you on the internet?
Dalyblack.com, DALYBLACK.com. And, we're here in Houston. We've got an office in Denver, and we really practice nationally now. And as to where they can find me individually, it's these days right here at home, sitting at my desk.
Me too. Buddy, hey, great to hear from you, man.
You too.
Hope your kids and hope Jennifer's doing well and everything, and take care of yourself, okay?
You too. Thanks, Brian, for having me on.
All right, man.
You've been listening to Lessons from Leaders with Brian Beckcom. If you've enjoyed this week's interview, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast and keep up with the latest episodes. You can also connect with Brian through his firm at vbattorneys.com.